Hey everyone, this is Tom, and this week's character is Givian Andreling Vika for Katie. Givian is a female human fighter. She is, as you can see in the notes, she's around 5'10", 155 pounds, mid-20s. She's got a strength and constitution sort of focus, being a fighter. Um, Physical description, straight red hair, parted down the middle, shoulder length, pale skin, gray eyes, tall and thin, but very muscular. She wears plate armor. It's polished steel with gold inlay. Cream-colored cloak of epic spell resistance from the hordes of the Underdark. Cloak clasp shaped like the Neverwinter Eye logo. Bastard sword called Nameless Light. Has an electrical aura of deep blue lightning. She has an old worn astral blade longsword she sometimes uses. It sort of more is like her, I guess, like utility weapon. But she's in for some serious business when her other sword, Nameless Light, gets pulled out. She is a skilled and ruthless fighter. She rarely smiles, but does have a skillful, sarcastic wit to her. But she is sort of an imposing, intimidating diplomat. So for her pose here, as I'm figuring this out, I just wanted something with her feet planted, standing strong, sort of immovable. Almost like negotiations have just turned, like she just knows that she just went past the tipping point. So she's not going to be moved. And then she's just starting to slowly pull her sword out, sort of like a gunslinger, just slowly grabbing his gun. So that's just what I went for Givian. It's a little bit dry, a little bit sort of standardish, but I thought it was good for the character. She's not that, at least as I've interpreted her, she's just not that flamboyant or dynamic or expressive, but she's just almost just stoic and grim and confident, and I just wanted that sort of power to be there in the pose. And I was happy with it. I think it turned out. Just moving some nudging things around. I usually try to avoid transform tool and selection tool as often as I can, just because even though I just do it sometimes, just when there's too much that would need to be redrawn. But if anytime that you can go in and redraw it rather than just tweak it, I would recommend it. It's better for, I think, in the future as you draw again. I think the more you just force yourself to just bite the bullet and redraw it, I think that will help in the future to just make the right drawing sooner. Like you just it's just practice, really. So once again, I like to start off with the pose, of course, just trying to get like the gesture and the posture there. It's almost like making my own sort of reference in case doing this more formal technical approach with the muscular system and the skeletal system can be too stiff, which often happens. I always like to just keep this initial sketch around just so I can then tweak the muscular system and stuff, just to make sure that the pose is living up to it after going through all the rigors of all this anatomy practice stuff. Now, a quick little thing there, I just measured out the length of the inside of the forearm from the inside of the elbow to the inside of the wrist is the same length as your foot. It's pretty much universal for humans. There was one earlier also where I took a line from the middle of the clavicle just at the top of the sternum to right in the front of the pubis bone, and that is usually on a human figure the same length as the femur. So if you're worried about your proportions, that's especially for the legs. I often tend to draw the legs too long. I think I'm just putting the midpoint of the figure just too low, but that's always a nice way to make sure that you're getting your legs to be the right sort of length, just from the top of the sternum to the front of the pubis, and then that's pretty much the same length as the femur. So that's something that comes in real handy. If anything, I'd say, like, if you're a little bit hesitant, just run a little short. It's very rare. I'd say it's more rare that it's longer than that distance. So being described as muscular, I'm trying to just emphasize this muscular system. It is going to be different than like a bulky male bodybuilder type muscular system. It's sort of like what I mentioned in the tarot video, where like a bodybuilder body is a very particular, very difficult sort of body, very specific, and it takes a lot of intentionality and a lot of like modern medical scientific knowledge to achieve it. So for this one, I was basically going more for like something a bit stringier, like a Bruce Lee, but a little bit more bulky. I'd imagine like Bruce Lee mixed with some sort of Valkyrie kind of body system. That's sort of what I went for. I remember I had this teacher, a gym teacher in junior high, and she had these like amazing like Bruce Lee arms, and I remember her bicep looked like an Akira Toriyama drawing, like the Dragon Ball guy, because I was really into Dragon Ball Z at the time, and she would often wear shirts with no sleeves, and I remember looking at her bicep and being like, that looks like a cartoon. So I'm just thinking back to that. She was probably the most muscular woman I've ever known, but I thought trying to add that like blockiness to some of the muscles on Givian would be good. So I noticed I had made the neck too long, so I shortened it down. And the head is one of those things you just don't want to spend too much time redrawing just because of how much time it takes. So just breaking my own rules all the time. Oh, excuse me. It's a lot of finessing the muscular system here. The male and female muscular system are almost identical, except for like the groin area. The only main thing is sort of like the bulkiness of the muscles. That's sort of like the only underlying difference. I'm sure if you took the average man and the average woman and skinned them and took all the fat off and stuff, you wouldn't be able to tell much difference. But in the diagrams that I usually see, like in one of my favorite anatomy books, Strength Training Anatomy, the female figures have just much less bulky muscles, and I just wanted to keep that like long and skinniness to her. Like, she is muscular, but she's also quite thin, and so I didn't want to push it too bulky or anything like that. Just grabbing for the sword there. I'm often reluctant to put in too much detail into certain features as I'm going. I just try to move quicker than I should. Things like hands and feet in particular, I often leave too simple, but it always bites me in the butt. The advice that I always give to to anybody who will listen, and stuff that I always try to force myself to abide by, is when it comes to every step of building up an illustration, it's always worth putting in the time for each step as you go. So for every like minute you spend sketching a hand, will save you 5 minutes in the inking stage. Excuse me. Just because now when it's time to ink it or draw it more refined, now it's going to be even harder to like get it right and to fix it up. You're going to be doing a lot of undo, and it's going to go really bad. So it's always worth just putting it in. This character involves a art history, human history first, and it is a female protagonist character with intentionally asymmetrical breasts. I always make sure the like the scrotum or the testicles, one is larger than the other, so you have like an off kilter scrotum in my sketches. And I thought, with the human system being what it is, breasts are extremely rarely perfectly symmetrical, so I thought, well, let's draw it that way on this character. So there you have it. World first, as far as I know. So when it comes to drawing these legs here, she's described as tall and thin and very muscular, so I'm trying to keep a lot of the body fat off, which makes her legs much more straight. Typically there's a lot of fat collected on the outside of the thigh, just hanging under the major trochanter of the femur. But in this case, I wanted to just make her as like long and tall as possible. People tend to always, of course, you've noticed, depict female characters all the exact same way. Typically. and I'm just not interested in that. I much rather have a female body that has character and personality and individuality than like just drawing another woman character. I just think any missed opportunity to go into depicting a personality is a missed opportunity. So here we are blocking in the costume. She's described as wearing plate armor. It's polished steel with gold inlay. So going through, it's just starting off with bulking out. Oh man, I'm yawning a lot today. Sorry guys. Just bulking in sort of like where the armor is going to go, making sure that her figure's still in there and everything. I wanted to include broad shoulders just to help make her look sturdier and more intimidating. Those get squared off eventually at some point, but yeah, there we go. Having something like a high collar, something sort of around her face. The one that I had initially started with was too pointy and villainish looking. Villainous-ish. But anyway, I thought I wanted to include it as like a way to frame her face, particularly the lower face around the mouth, as sort of like an amphitheater kind of like something hopefully that would like help project her voice or make it ring more clearly. I mean, it wouldn't because it's behind her mouth. Yeah, but that's just kind of what I was hoping to go for, and something that would also draw attention to her face. Something just very open, not too high, not too cluttery, but just something where her face is completely visible. As far as all the pointiness stuff goes, I needed to make sure that she looked like ruthless and harsh, and points are a great way to do that. So blocky, squarey stuff with pointy things, like you really wouldn't want to get her started. She's got a cloak. It's a magical cloak. It is how is it? Yeah, it's a cream-colored cloak of epic spell resistance from Hordes of the Underdark. I'll be getting into the different pieces of her uniform in particular in a bit more detail later on. But yeah, building it up. Her and her sister were orphaned when they were children, and they were raised by. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so they were raised by a noble, and so I figured she's going to be a bit prim, a bit proper, and also kind of well financed. So I wanted her to have a fancier, more cohesive suit of armor than say like Terrell had. He was just picking up what he found and using what worked really well. But I think a character like this, like she either had this commissioned, or it was given to her, or it was like something. Okay, there we go. I finally got that yawn out. Okay. Yeah, just something very particular to her. It was like specifically hers, given to her, made for her, or what have you. Something that was a bit more ornate as well, like those shoulder pads with the with those wing shapes sort of coming in. Wings being sort of like an angelic, sort of virtuous kind of symbol. Like she is a good character. She does have a heart of gold, even though she's pretty gruff and to the point. She does have a sense of humor. She is very, very kind on the inside, very generous, which is another thing I wanted to work on bringing out with her character. But yeah, very just sort of fancy, curvy armor, but pointy and strong looking. It's based on a lot of French suits of armor, but when it comes to medieval fantasy stuff, it's really rare that I ever base stuff off of one particular suit of armor. A lot of it is sort of pick and choose whatever is going to work for whatever you're working on. So Givian was another one of those characters that took a lot longer than I was expecting. The total runtime of this whole thing was probably about 9 to 9.5 hours. It's just that I think there was a lot to her character. She has a long history. She's got on a lot of like really impressive adventures, and a challenge with a lot of that is sort of picking and finding out which sort of events and adventures could have had like a permanent physical effect, like something visible. Things like one of the things she's done is she has killed Mephistopheles. He got out of hell, she chased him out, and she killed him in the streets, and that that I don't think we could really underplay how much that can say about a character if they've literally killed a massively powerful demon. I think that would leave that person with a certain understanding of what they were capable of and how powerful they were and how not to mess with them is a very wise course for people's lives. So she does have that kind streak, but I see that almost more of like a sense of justice thing rather than being like a sweetheart. And plus, if you're somebody who can kill a demon, and somebody who has been to the 8th circle of hell and gotten out, I thought that keeping her grim, and at least presenting her as someone who's a bit grim would take precedence over something a little bit softer. So like I've said in other videos, I don't have a set procedure. For lately I have been doing the notes, and then the figure sketch, and then the bones, and then the muscles, but after that it's just kind of like a higgledy-piggledy gong show of like what order I go things in. Usually just blocking in the armor and outfit as like silhouettes and then inking it or like cleaning it up. This time I totally overlooked the inking the costume stuff and just sort of dove right in. I think at this point I'm sort of trying to pick and choose from stuff that I've done that I think lent to speed, whatever's sort of more efficient. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, the ways that I color are the ways that work for me, and I think it's more important that people find whatever is comfortable for them. I mean, with Photoshop, with everything you're doing digitally, there's like, whenever somebody asks me how to do something, I could give them between 2 and 5 answers for each simple thing. And even if you watch like your favorite artists or like another artist that you really admire or respect, watching them use Photoshop is really frustrating a lot of the time. Like when I watch like my brother, when I watch him do stuff, I'm just like, why don't you make that on a new layer? Why don't you should do this part in that way? Well, like you could have just done that, and now you'd still have, and whatever. But as long as you just make it how you know how to make it, that's fine. So even though I might offer advice on procedure, technique, or how to work on stuff, it's much more important. I'd always recommend more so that you just find out for yourself. So Givian is a redhead. I actually really like drawing redheads. They have a really distinct look that's difficult to capture. It's really easy to just get it wrong. You don't want it to just look like a person with dyed hair. There's a lot more to it than that. and I really like drawing redheaded people for like fantasy stuff. It's just a really nice like European. Being a person in the New World, it's almost exotic. I don't see like redheads very often where I live in Canada. Maybe like redhead, maybe like once every couple weeks. They're pretty rare, but they do have a really neat look and it's fun to do. It's like one of those things where if you can make it look how it should, then it looks a lot more interesting. It's just so non-generic, and it's a really nice break. It's just a nice challenge, and it's fun. And it's a cool look too, like freckles and heavy eyelids and orange hair and pale skin. It's a fun thing. Yeah, it's just neat. So I did have a picture on my other monitor of just like a redheaded woman that I found that had sort of the right kind of redheadedness look to it. Mostly for around the eyes. There was like, I noticed like with like the thinner skin around the eyes and having kind of like that grayish, purplyish kind of look. I thought that if I'm really gonna try to get it at least slightly close, I should use some photo reference, which was good. Even just for like seeing how like the bone structure and the lighting around the face and how much like pink is in the cheeks, or like how the skin responds to light and all that stuff. It's very useful. She doesn't look like the model, but that's kind of more how I like to use reference, just to try to understand how it works rather than how it actually looks. But it's fun. It's worth it. I definitely want to make a video about my thoughts on how and when and why to use reference and where to find the good stuff. I think that would be a really fun video. But all the like tutorial particular videos are, I can see they're, I'm gonna really need to like write them and like find like get images and sort of almost make like a presentation of it. But anyway, so yeah, just spending lots of time on the face. I like to get the face done early if I can. It can do a lot to help keep the rest of the character going, like something to kind of anchor everything on and make, like whenever you add something, it's sort of anchored by the face, which is, it's either the first or the second most expressive part of the character. The only other contestant for that would be the body language. The body language is really important if you want to like sell a character. I spent a lot of time rendering and re-rendering and shaping and reshaping the armor. It's always good to, and I wish I had gotten more reference and studies done on armor before starting. Just not that I'm happy with the end result, but it would have made the process a lot more streamlined and gotten to the end result a lot faster if I had gotten a lot more engaged with the way that light hits metal and all that stuff. I've actually been doing a lot of research into physically based rendering, like in real-time graphic stuff, and how 3D software sort of does different passes on materials and how to explain materials and think about materials in a simple way that just kind of helps make things go a bit more straightforward, like things like dielectric materials, electric materials, metalness, reflectiveness, when to use, like how does why does plastic and whatever reflect differently than metal. And once I get my own sort of way to phrase things, I'll probably make a video about that too, that sort of like in-depth technical rendering lighting stuff. But I need to be able to really explain it in my own words. So underneath her armor here, she's got a gambeson, which is like a padded undercoat for that a lot of like armor wearers would wear under their armor. I go in like I wanted it to be red. Red is something a bit classier, higher end, I'd imagine. And then also with the cut of it, like it's got a high collar because she's noble born. I wanted it to be a bit more like officious, high up and more dignified. And then for the shape of it at the bottom, rather than having it just be a blocked off straight edge, I wanted it to have a little bit more of a design to it because it would have been more expensive. But it's also a rounded design, just as sort of like a call to her, like her inner kindness. So like her armor, her exterior, and her silhouette is very pointy, angular, sturdy. But then on the interior stuff, I wanted it to be within the silhouette a little bit, but more like literally like her layers. As you get closer to her, it's round and soft and padded, and even like the as I go in later and add the stitching, rather than like the simple grid of pads or padding stitching of the gambeson, it's like ornate and rounded and swirly, and so it's not only more expensive, but it's organic and flowy and a bit just more beautiful. So yeah, lots of facets and metals and angles going here and there. As far as like the shape of the metal on the arms and stuff, I wanted it to keep that sort of blocky, angular look that I put into the muscular system. It looks less deliberately medieval, and a little it pushes it a bit more towards fantasy stuff, where that angle is a bit like extreme and designy. And she also had spent quite some months living amongst the drow, the dark elves, the subterranean dark elves, worship a big spider. You know the guys, or the women in that case. They're a really angry sort of matriarchal society that worship a spider. But yeah, I thought maybe that might have like given her, if she did end up commissioning this armor afterwards, it might have been based on something she had been wearing underground that the drow had given her, or something that's a bit more harder edged. Like she just sort of gathered a lot of like strength and intimidation, and like learned a lot about that kind of way to express yourself from the drow. And so having stuff that's a bit more blade like, I thought would be pretty cool. I do end up rounding this collar out quite a bit around her face. I just wanted it something that didn't go, that didn't like cover up her face or sort of require a helmet or anything. Just out and open. She prefers diplomacy. She'll always try to talk things out first before pulling out her sword. So having her face framed and not crowded was important. As for her gloves and gauntlets and greaves, she's got, pretty standard, not too fantastical, like gauntlet things over her hands. But I wanted to give her exposed fingers, or just like fingerless gloves, where it's like, it's more like a sensitivity thing, like she could pick something up for somebody, or like hold a child's hand, or to like lead them out of somewhere, or even just to get like a better sense of what her weapon was doing, and like just something just a lot more like nuanced and particular. I mean, you could even, if I go even too far, like now I'm just making stuff up, but you could even just say like with a sword that has an electrical aura around it, you wouldn't want to necessarily be holding it with metal gloves. I mean, even though the metal is like right there, but the actual like you contacting it, you could get zaps and stuff. But I wanted something that sort of would enable her to just have like a little bit of that like softer, sort of like more of like more of a gentle touch, because it's really either her weapon is hitting you, or she's touching you, and it's kind of like those two things. So that's why she's got fingerless gloves. So yeah, lots of rendering, lots of trial and error. Really nitpicky stuff, but it's fun. But yeah, like I've said in a few places, that a big part of me doing these videos is to just get better. It's just really good practice. I've already been learning a lot, making a lot of corrections, and starting to notice a lot of like mistakes and stuff that I already do. And I even had this morning I found somebody had critiqued my Terrell design on my YouTube, the long play video of it. I think it was a long play video version, but he made a really good point of I had these green dragon scoots, the scale scoots on the outside of the shoulder pad, and I had like they did come to a point, and the top ones aimed away from the head so that it would glance up, but the ones going down the arms were sort of like facing back up, sort of like a coat hook. And he made the great point of like those not glancing off a weapon, and I thought that was like such a good call. I remember even when I was drawing it, I was like, oh, it'd be more interesting as if these ones were flipped that way, and so you had like this kind of pointed thing going back up, and I broke my own rule. I was trying to go for something that looked cooler rather than something that was right, and I got caught in my own trap, and now I'm even more resolved to not break my rules. So I can't remember what his name was, but I really appreciated that kind of input and insight. I loved it. Yeah. But yeah, so this has all been a really big learning experience so far. I did play with the idea of having the inside gambeson, her red thing, be velvet. I gave up on that. I thought it was just maybe a bit too a bit too dark, a bit too kind of fancy. I wouldn't have wanted to just have like velvet. I would have wanted to messy it up a bit, and I just didn't think that would be. It would just start getting a lot too like really too noisy and sort of messy, and it's also velvet is really a dark material, and I didn't want to lose that detail. I thought like the whatever more bits that I could like, the velvet would basically just say she's raised by a noble, she's got some money, or at least some class, but it was more important to me to have those sort of like softer image, like the imagery stuff that was depicted there. So I went with just like the standard like either cotton or wool kind of gambeson. So when it comes to this metal, when you're sort of rearranging the shapes of armor and stuff, it takes a lot of sort of guesswork to make it look like something that you're kind of going for. I did have this one picture of a suit of armor, but it just wasn't the same angle or even the same sort of structure. But it was nice to just kind of see how quickly things became like reflective, and or like where the specular or the shine was, and how much of it to have and how much to not include, and it was just really fun. As far as the boots go, I get into it later on, but she's got really well kept polished black leather boots, just to go with her more like just formal, classy noble-born, or not noble-born, but the experience with the nobles stuff. Somebody who works for, she currently is sort of employed by like the Neverwinter noble. I picture her being somebody who is has just a lot more discipline and integrity. And I thought that it'd be good to just have that sort of that habit expressed that way, where she just, her stuff is well kept. I don't know if my mic can pick it up, but my cat is in the room and he's crunching. So if you ever hear crunching in my videos, it's the cat, it's not me. I don't eat or drink when I do the videos. Yeah, lots of rendering, lots of guesswork, lots of metal. Again, wish I had some better reference for it, but I also it's really rare that I actually do I give a character this much plate armor, like all the way like head to toe. I basically only went with it because well, it's two reasons. One is Katie mentioned that she wears polished steel armor, and plate armor, so I figured, okay, she's probably it's quite likely that she has like a full outfit in mind, but also because if she had some of it made for her, then she probably had the whole thing made for her, so she probably owns the whole suit, so it makes sense. You know what, she's probably gonna just wear it, because she wouldn't have commissioned a suit of armor that she wouldn't wear. So that's why I went with the whole armor. She's someone a lot more well put together than a lot of other fantasy characters that I typically draw, which is fun. Oh yeah, and the swords on her hilt there, they do change a little, like quite a bit from like how they're depicted now. But I did want to have them put together. She's got the one bastard sword, Nameless Light, that's like her magically imbued like mega weapon that means business. But she also has a long sword that goes along with it. It's a bit in rougher shape. It's old and has seen better days, but it's sort of like she'll use that one first, unless either she really means business or, that one's for the garden. The bastard sword is for the hunt, and in this case, she's drawing the bastard sword because it's it's cooler. Okay, so she's got this cloak of epic spell resistance. So at first I was always just picturing it like something almost more like a wool blanket that's thrown over. But as the more I got into it, it's like, if it's a cloak of epic spell resistance, there should be a bit more to it, a bit more, something being built with a bit more longevity, something with a bit of flash and money kind of put into it. So it has a leather border, just to keep things from getting messed up. The outside I picture being wool, because wool is waterproof and it would just be like good to just have that outside. On the inside it's like a blue silkish kind of fancy lighting, and then around the outside is just silver thread, just decoration sort of trim. I just wanted it to be something that was made just with a bit more care. It's also fancier and nicer, and by having a bit more detail here and there on something like that, it I think it hints at just a deeper, like there's more to it than just being a cloak. And I know that a lot of stuff, if you just had like a weapon with some sort of imbued thing, that doesn't mean that it's going to be obvious. It's just like you wouldn't even necessarily be able to tell until you used it. Like, it might not be visibly useful, but if you have a choice between making something mundane or making something a bit more interesting, probably around 8 to 9 times out of 10, you should probably try to make it more interesting, if you can. Hair is often a challenge as well. The artist Sam Nielsen, he's one of my favorites. especially when it comes to, I mean, mostly because of his knowledge on lighting and color and stuff. But he had this one little diagram about how to paint hair. It basically, like, when you have light reflecting off of hair, there's almost like two bands. There's a brighter, more saturated color of the hair that's and then more like a white kind of band. And it depends on kind of like how the light's going into the hair and bouncing either off the front surface or the interior surface. And it was just a nice simple diagram, but there is a lot more to hair than people realize, and it's still something that I'm trying to get better at. It's a challenging thing, but as with everything with practice, it goes. And it's like when it comes to art in general, if something is difficult to draw, you should draw it more. That's where you find out where the leaks in your ship are. Is if you find it challenging, if you avoid it, if it's something you intentionally avoid because it's difficult, then you need to draw a lot of it. And I'm guilty of that. That's what I do. It really, like, I always I've always, in my heart of hearts, I've been aware of it, but it's something I've just been telling my students, where it's like, how do you draw hands? Well, you draw a lot of hands, and here's some simple things to think about when drawing hands. And just like, if something, always telling them if it's hard, you should draw it. And then now it's like, you know what, I should really just live by that advice. I should take that on, and it's been helping a lot. I've been drawing more, and I've been getting better at stuff, and it's been really nice. So yeah, back to the cloak. There's just some. It's a bit padded and nicer in there. It's not just like a flat piece of fabric that just serves a super basic function. It is like something nicer than just a sheet. So some more of that silver thread sort of lining stuff up. There's just some sort of technical things about armor that get put on, just based on like armor references. There's this band of leather that sort of went around and had this clasp, but I changed this one up a bit. It's just a lot of those like nice little details that help sell a suit of armor. I'm sure if anybody makes armor and sees this video, they would probably want to kick me off of a bridge, especially like John Howe. I remember when I was growing up, well, even now, like every Christmas I watched the Lord of the Rings special features, and one of the things that always struck me was, and it was a really big inspiration early on, was John Howe sort of getting uppity about how difficult armor is to design, and how particular it is, and how people really overlook it and assume too much about armor, and that it's very unforgiving in reality. And whether you're designing stuff for a movie or a game, and even whether it's armor or anything else, things deserve the respect that they are due. Like in armor, as the example, if I'm trying to do these things in one sitting, or like in about 8 hours, so I don't have a lot of time, but I think I have the duty to go and study art and put much more effort into armor. Just like making sure that it's something that like your arm could actually bend in, or you could raise your arm without slicing your jugular vein because of this bit of plate mail over here, and just anything that just works. So at this point, because I don't have as much time to dedicate to studying research in particular, I don't know where or when to go actually get my hands on some, even just to hold or to move around or to watch people fight in armor. At this point, I think the most responsible thing to do is just, whenever doing plate armor, just try to base it on reality as often as you can. Like, use reference, draw as close to an actual suit of armor as you can, and then just kind of skew it and decorate it and modify it in any way to make it suit the character more, or the culture more, or whatever you're designing it for. And just try not to break it. So she's got some leather spats over her shoes. There's something, another like bit of like just classiness there. Just highly polished leather boots. Yeah, leather spats under her shin guards there. I think the shin guards are called greaves. Another character with well-groomed fingernails. Now she is a fighter. Normally on a fighter I would give them like short or broken nails. But because she's a very skilled fighter, I thought that would be sort of a good status symbol of her skill, was just be having nice nails. So underneath her her gambeson in there, there's like a bit of like a white bit of fabric, and that's just, you know, as I mentioned before, like getting the deeper you get towards her, the more of like her true character you get. And so I wanted to just have like something just white and pure and clean. So as you get in there, it's just sort of like a thing that depicts her goodness. And it's just clean and white, and even, you know, the benefit of it is that I think it also helps a little bit like around her neck, with the like formal noble stuff as well, like just like a white collar. So here's something sort of pine coney and flowery and organic, just soft. You know, it'd be more expensive, but it's also a lot more like friendly looking than just the typical horizontal lines and vertical lines that a gambeson comes with. You got chainmail underneath, just practical, just for practical reasons. For me, the one downside about drawing the character for about 9 hours and then shortening it down to 60 minutes is that the camera can get super jittery because I move around a lot. I'm always just sort of trying to plug random leaks here and there, like whenever I see something, just sort of going for it. And so I zip around a lot, but there is something that I do want to try in the future as far as film recording. But you know, this is, I think it's each time I do a video I'm getting more and more technical things sorted out, which is fun. I'm hoping in this video there will be less echo, but we'll see. So yeah, just softening edges, rounding things out, adding little bits of detail here and there, just clasps, just something really practical. Yeah, lots of figuring and tinkering. It's sort of like when I mentioned earlier about how you should spend the time on the sketch, so when you refine it, you save a lot of time. You don't have to solve it again later. In this case, I would personally have, in the future, I'll spend more time gathering just the right reference. With the armor, it just took so much second guessing and tinkering and trying stuff out. That it's sort of, yeah, it's just like you feel less confident as you're going, and it's just not very good. And also, if you're doing this professionally, speed is a factor. You should be doing stuff as fast as you possibly can, just producing as much work as you can, and any sort of steps that you can take to help facilitate that, I could only highly recommend doing so. So in the future, yeah, like especially plate armor, I'll definitely gather the right reference. But it's also something now moving forward that I'm going to just be drawing much more of and putting in that research. So this is where things change up a bit. The plate armor that Katie described is polished steel with gold inlay. Now I've kind of had over the past like maybe over 15 years now, I've just had a real ass full of the typical like gold inlay armor that you see in every single piece of fantasy art. I mean, from World of Warcraft to Battle Chasers to D&D, like official book, like you just see it, it's like all over the place. It's ubiquitous. It's just the gold spirals and swirls, and everything's got gold trim. And I mean, it's there for a reason. It looks great. It looks sweet. But when everybody has it, it's just another one of those things that I think has lost its context because it looks cool. Like people aren't using it where it should be there, and so it's kind of like an anti-concept art where it just looks so good and it's so cool that you gotta put it in there. But once you're there, you just gotta put it in there for a reason. So when I was doing this stuff, I wanted to sort of break the mold a little bit as much as I could. I've got the gold inlay around the inside of her neck guard there. It's sort of like not only does it draw attention to her face, but it sort of gilds her voice and her words a bit. It's formal, it's fancy, but it's also kind of like a horn or like a trumpet, like a brass instrument looking into a sweet saxophone or something. She's also started off with this gold arrow up her chest, pointing up towards her face, trying to draw the eyes from the breastplate to her face. And then I intentionally avoided doing any swirls. So Katie, I'm sorry if you wanted the swirly filigree style gold inlay, but I just had to fight it. I couldn't put it in there. But so straight lines with feathery, with a stylized feather kind of fire in like form to the points of stuff, and also not putting it everywhere. I wanted it up towards her head, up towards her face, just to keep that attention up there. She is a diplomat, and I wanted the gold near her voice and her face. I wish I could say it was intentional as well, but it's also like as you get towards her face from her feet, you've got the color. She's mostly gray, but she has blue, and then red, and then yellow, from the cloak to the gambeson to the gold, which is sort of like a level of like the colors get more eye catching as it goes towards her face. You know that. It would have been sweet if I was clever enough to have thought of that beforehand when coming up with their color scheme, but it was just a happy accident that I was happy with. So yeah, just reworking in the swords, putting in the details. I often like to just add things with a very different color so that I can keep track of where all the new stuff is coming in. And then, because you can always change it later. I've actually started getting into the habit of using like all these masking layers for adding color. Like I'll choose like a crazy color. It's like what I did with the gold inlay. I'll choose like a really bright color. I'll put it where I know it's going to need to be, and then I'll figure out the right color with the sliders rather than sitting there and hemming and hawing about how much red or green or blue I should add to a color or how bright or dark I should make it. I figure out what the right color is later because I already know where I'm going to put that color. It's just more important that I find out what the right color is going to be. Wait, what? Okay, yeah, so just, put the color where you know it's going to be, and then pick the color afterwards. It's one of the beautiful benefits of digital art. So I've got the swords attached together. I didn't want to have them in different places. I thought that, they should just be together. It's a bit classier. It's less cluttery. I was inspired by like when you see the Japanese warrior guys with the two swords tucked into their belt just right beside each other. I mean, it makes sense that a sword would be drawn from the same place, even if you have two. But then they're just sort of attached more like a Western medieval style with just some belts. She's got the bastard sword primarily on her hip, like that's her main weapon, and then the other one just attached to the sheath of that one, just with some practical straps, very practical. But I did want to make sure that they looked like they were from different cultures, not only from her outfit, but also from each other. One is a bastard sword, which has an unknown origin. The other is an astral blade, and so I just wanted something that looks a bit just fancier and just more, not delicate, but ornate or what? Just slight and graceful. It took a lot of repaints, these swords. And I just wanted to be done. By this point, I had spent a good 8 hours on it or so, 8.5 hours, and I just wanted to be done. But this is for somebody who cares about the character. This is for somebody who put their faith in me, and I can't disappoint them. I need to put that extra time and effort. And I wasn't happy with the sword. I wanted to be done, but I wanted to be happy with it. It was more important that it be something that I'm happy with and something I could be proud of. So I just had to scrap it and redo that sword, and it was worth it. It's always worth it. It's always worth it to redo it. Even when it comes to digital art, like I've been doing it so long that I save it by reflex, probably within every 10 seconds. Like my hand just does the Control S motion without even thinking anymore. Teaching students, a lot of them learn that lesson the hard way. Even myself, like losing stuff, like working so hard and then you have to redo the whole thing, or like 4 hours of work gone or more. But you do need to learn to save regularly, but there is some silver lining there in the fact that if every single time I've ever lost something, whether it's all of it or a big chunk of it, if I just redo it, it's always many times better. So there's always that. It's always better if you redo it. And so when I got to talk people down off that ledge, that's usually what I try to say to get them to not be so down. It's just like, hey, at least you're going to have a much better piece by the end. So I finally have a reason to use my other brush. That's the soft edge stuff. I usually only use that when it comes to either depicting really smooth, rounded shapes with that are in good condition, like a perfect orb, or like glowing effects and lighting and stuff. In this case with lighting, I grabbed some reference from a Tesla coil. I'm just looking at how much the light gathers and all that. It's just good reference. Yeah, it's got the aura of deep blue lightning, and I just figured that would be constantly active, but it would be contained within the sheath. So once it comes out, it just starts like crackling and spilling out, and like all these tendrils of electricity going all around, and it was fun to do. And so that's that. This was Givian Adrenaline Vika for Katie, and she was really fun to do. I was wondering, like the YouTube stats tells me about my demographics of my viewers, and it's I think I have 11% now female viewers, and I was wondering how long it would take for a female person to win now my cat's climbing all over me to win it. But I was happy that it just happened that early, and I didn't have to fudge anything. So thanks everybody for watching. If you're new to all this, I've got a free character art lottery. Just follow me on Twitter at R&D Fantasy and just look alive. And this was really fun to do, and I really hope that you learned something from it, or if it was any good at all. So let me know if this works, and hope it helped. Thanks.